Now, in the past 5 years or so, our newspapers and televisions have been overwhelmed with information concerning the state of our economy. The use of words like recession, double dip, credit crunch have become common practice. But do you actually understand this economic terminology and understand what's actually happening to our economy in Britain, apart from the fact that when you go shopping you know that things are more expensive? Simon Rose, our Friday film reviewer, also wears an economic hat as part of Save Our Savers, and he's here, hopefully, to enlighten us all. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning, Annie.
Can you explain, first of all, what Save Our Savers is?
Yes, certainly. An organisation set up just about 2.5 years ago, simply to fight for the rights of savers and pensioners who, particularly among society, have to live often on fixed incomes or rely on their savings. And as anybody in that situation would know, the value of money is declining all the time. And if you're trying to survive on savings and inflation's actually going up by more than the interest rate you can get on your money, then really your money is becoming worth less all the time. It's a very frightening state to be in for millions of people around the country.
We should presumably then have a better handle on how we understand the economy, but when those in power also muddle up things like deficit and debt, you wonder where the hope is.
Yes, I'm sorry to say that's true. I mean, one of the reasons I'm talking is we wanted to produce a very simple guide called What's Wrong with the Economy, so people can try and get their head around it. But as you say, yes, Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, even on occasion the Chancellor, have got muddled between the difference between the debt and the deficit, and you do really want to just weep when even the people trying to control what's happening get it wrong.
This may sound like a really banal, simple question, but what is the problem with the economy?
Well, that's a very simple question. It's a very, very complicated answer.
Yes.
In general, I think the problem is that we went into this credit crunch. They assumed it was just going to be a normal recession. They did the things they normally do. What they had not realised was this was something completely different. This was a recession caused by a massive overindulgence of debt. As both a state and as a nation, we borrowed way too heavily to try and produce growth. And when things suddenly turned down, everybody suddenly realised that, like some cartoon character, they're pedaling massively with their legs, and as soon as they look down they realise there's a cliff. And the problem is that lowering interest rates, which is the natural reaction of the central bank, may produce a very short turn upwards in growth, but it doesn't really help because what they're trying to do is encourage lots more debt. But the problem is we're in this situation because there's too much debt, something like £260,000 per taxpayer in the UK if you add up the household debt, the corporate debt and the government's massive debt as well.
And presumably, however massively we are indebted, the government adds more debt every year.
Yes, well, that how much they add a year is the deficit. This is where government ministers get so confused. And they're adding somewhere of the order of 100 billion to 120 billion. We may find out a little bit more this week. The actual debt at the moment is about £1 trillion. Now the problem is that when you go beyond million and into billions and then into trillions, your head just starts swimming and you think, a trillion doesn't sound that much more than a billion, really. But if you think of these numbers in terms of seconds, then 1 million seconds is 12 days, 1 billion seconds is 32 years, but 1 trillion seconds, and that's the number of pounds the government is in debt, is 32,000 years. So that really is absolutely astonishingly heavily indebted. And on the government's own figures, which, as you can imagine, are pretty optimistic, that is due to go up by the end of the life of this Parliament to 1.5 trillion. That's if things are going well and the economy is growing. And you don't need me to tell you that isn't the case.
That isn't happening.
So the government's expenditure is going to be ever that greater and its income is going to be less. So I'm afraid 1.5 trillion is optimistic.
I'm trying to ask very simple questions because I know the answers are quite complicated. So here's another simple one. Why aren't low interest rates producing the boost to the economy we were led to expect?
Well, there are many reasons for this. One is that I would argue we shouldn't have a central bank actually controlling the price of money, because that's essentially what interest rates are. Now, normally that would be set in the market. You'd have people who wanted to lend money, savers. You'd have people who wanted to borrow money, either for household items or companies. And normally the market will decide, well, if more people want to save, then the price of money would be less. But they decided, no, Soviet style, we'd like to control the price of money, because the 9 people in the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, even though I don't think any of them have had any experience of business, we know better than the market, therefore we'll decide the price of money, just like the Soviets used to do with bread. And the problem is, you cut the price of money, what happens? Well, there's a shortage of it. What a surprise. Who knew? Well, they clearly didn't.
Low interest rates distort the economy, though, don't they? They devalue our pensions and annuities.
They cause all manner of problems. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, it's fine for me because I've got a mortgage that's linked to the interest rate. I'm a little better off. Well, the trouble is, if you've got a pension, you probably aren't. The policies the Bank of England brought in have, according to the Pension Funds Association, getting on for something like 300 billion. If you're taking out an annuity, which you have to as you retire, the value of that has dropped massively. If you're trying to live off savings, that has also dropped. And the unintended consequence, because there are always unintended consequences of economic policies, and they never think about these. They think, we'll drop interest rates and the savers who've got money will start spending. Well, of course, exactly the opposite happened. The savers suddenly thought, hang on a second, my savings are now being depleted without me doing anything. Effectively, my money is being stolen from me.
Yes.
I'd better hang on to these because I don't know when I'm going to be able to get a return again. And so, yes, as you say, savers and pensions are suffering terribly because of this. What's then happening, of course, is that they're not spending as much, when what we really need is people to be spending. So the people who are heavily indebted, they're not going to spend because they're trying to get down their debts, and the people who've got the money don't spend because their money is being stolen away from them. The only group that seems to benefit, apart from people on fixed-rate mortgages, which isn't that many, the only other group that benefits, of course, is the banks, who have been doing very nicely. And, if you're being unduly cynical, you can argue that almost everything that's been done has been designed to prop up the banks. And we learnt only last week from a committee of MPs that the £66 billion we put into those 2 banks, we're probably never going to get back. It's more than the education budget for the year.
And makes the richest even richer still.
Yes, I'm afraid I used to think that was sort of conspiracy theory stuff, but I'm afraid
It's
even
true.
the Bank of England has proved that, yes, the very richest are getting much richer at the expense of the rest of us, which I don't think anybody except them is very keen on.
Let's talk briefly on inflation. The government target for inflation is 2%. What's happening with inflation? Explain it. In a couple of sentences. There's your challenge.
Okay. Well, the problem is low interest rates will start to release inflation. The pound goes down because of low interest rates. As a result, the things we have to buy from abroad become more expensive, as you will notice. Essentially what's happening is the famous pound in your pocket is worth less all the time. Anybody who goes out shopping will see this officially. CPI inflation is going up by 2.7%. But I think, as everybody knows, prices of things we really care about and need, energy and food, are going up much faster than that. And, it's fine that technological goods are going down in price, but I'm afraid everything else is getting much worse. And although we've seen inflation going up to 2.7%, I'm afraid all the forecasts are it's going to get much worse.
Well, that brings me to my final point, because I guess and the reason we're talking about it is to try and get a better understanding, because the more we understand it, the more likely we are to not let people pull the wool over our eyes. But why is it still going on? It's been 5 years since the credit crunch hit. Mervyn King said recently he thinks the recession will last another 5 years. Aren't most recessions supposed to be over by now?
Yes, absolutely. This is longer even than the Great Depression. Perhaps not quite as severe, but if it goes on another 5 years, it will be much, much worse. It's odd, isn't it, that Mervyn King thinks it's going to go on another 5 years, but at no point says, well, maybe we've done the wrong things. And I think the problem is it's a little like a doctor misdiagnosing a patient. It doesn't matter how many aspirin you give them for the headache. If they're actually really severely ill, then they're not going to get better. And until they address the real problems, which is a massive overhang of debt, which we need to try and grow our way out of. Finding ways to get people to borrow more money is not going to help. And ultimately, they're really playing a very, very dangerous game, because we are in almost the same situation as Spain or Greece. We just have a bit more confidence from the international markets. Now, if that confidence disappears, the scenes you see on the streets of Greece or Spain could just as easily happen here. People joke about inflation getting out of control, but they are doing nothing to control control it. They're putting all this money through, we won't talk about what it is now, quantitative easing, but essentially they are printing more money all the time, and it could have an appalling effect. We're sort of sitting at the top of a very slippery slope, and I'm terribly afraid that they're going to give us a push rather than pull us back.
Simon Rose, as always, thanks very much indeed. If you'd like to learn more, and it is written in such I can understand the economy, Save Our Savers. If you go to their website, saveoursavers.co.uk, and there's a section there with What's Wrong with the Economy? A layman's guide to understanding why we're in such a mess.